Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure and honor to be here with such a distinguished panel at such a fantastic event. Thank you all for coming to our session. Definitely going to be the most exciting and interesting one, I think, so you made the right choice. I am Jamil Andolini. I'm the Regional Director for Politico in Europe. I oversee our operations throughout Europe. But I'm myself a child of globalization. I was born, my mother was from New Zealand. My father was from San Francisco, from an Italian immigrant family living in San Francisco. My parents met in Kenya. I was born in Kuwait. Then I went to school in Oman. I went to school in New Zealand. And then I moved to China in January 2000. And I lived in China for 22 years. And after living in China for 22 years, I moved to Brussels, the capital of Europe. And I've been there for the last 4 years. So I consider myself absolutely a child of globalization, a child of this era that we've lived through the last few decades. But my observation, particularly from my time in China and now moving to Europe, is that we have entered the age of fracturing. Globalization is clearly over, and we've entered this age where supply chains, sea lanes, alliances have all begun to splinter and fracture. As we've seen so clearly over the last week, even the United States, which was really the architect, the builder of this age of globalization, is now willing to wield its immense financial and military power in a way that it had refrained from doing over the last few decades. And consequentially, I think it's revealing probably the true limits of that diminishing power of the United States. Supply chains that spread across the world, entered into all parts of the world, are shriveling, are retrenching, and are starting to reform into regional blocks and into bilateral trade agreements. And I think I'd like to start by talking to our representatives from industry to maybe give us a flavor of those changes that we've seen in supply chains over the last couple of years. And maybe Matthias, if you don't mind, I will start with you. You work at a very high level for a very, very important company, Bayer, and obviously global supply chains are very much part of your business. Could you tell us, just maybe give us a bit of a flavor of how, doesn't have to be about Bayer, but about how you've seen supply chains change over the last few years?
Yeah, thank you. And I spent my time in business in two companies. One of them was Mars, a consumer goods company, I want to say around the time of the high times or pinnacle of globalization. And then 8 years ago, I joined Bayer. And first of all, the globalization as it has shaped global businesses, as it has shaped all of our lives and many others for sure, is over. And you can debate that, you can even think it's not over, but the more you avoid to face the new reality, the more you will fail as a business. And the supply chains are a great example for it. Globalization was a lot about just in time. It was a lot about ways to reduce your net working capital. It was a lot about trying to dominate your supply chain strategy through a lens of an Excel file or of cost. We have seen during COVID that probably didn't work out so well. But now I think we live in a time where, on top of the challenges that come from a global pandemic, there's a huge political challenge. When President Xi and President Trump met in Korea, President Xi, for the first time, I think, signaled that China does not only have choke points, but also wants to make use of them by way of a chokehold. Before that, that was more the way the US operated, but latest, since the fall of last year, we can now see we live in an age of mutually assured disruption. And that means that for businesses, the good old quote of Mark Twain, who once said, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, but what you know that just ain't so, is now the mantra. So most businesses and most boardrooms at the moment are like circus artists who are very good in juggling different objects or different priorities, who suddenly experience a change in gravity. And your muscle memory doesn't work anymore. And when you look at many of the quarterly call recordings and you analyze them, you realize how deeply insecure and how challenging that is for the global business community.
I love that. I've known Matthias for a few years already, and he always gives me the best quotes that I then steal and go and use and pretend they're mine. So board members like circus performers for whom gravity has just changed. I love that. That's a nice one. That's a new one. Thank you. Brendan, I'd love to, Boeing obviously is a massive global company as well, with supply chains reaching into all sorts of markets and all sorts of areas. How have you seen your supply chains or the supply chains of other major global companies change? And especially, I guess, for a company like yours, which is also tied up in defense and security.
Well, thank you very much, Jamil. Firstly, to people, please continue to eat. You might as well enjoy something while I'm speaking. It doesn't matter what age any of us is, whether it's the baby in the stroller in the front row here or someone my age, the world into which all of us was born is gone and it's not coming back. We're living through the most consequential geopolitical realignment in our lifetime. It is for business, particularly global businesses like ours, the most complex operating environment since the end of the Second World War. Our company is 110 years old. We've gone through 2 world wars, the Cold War, wars in the Middle East, Vietnam and other places, but this is the most difficult and challenging time that we've had. Our experience is exactly like that of Matthias. In terms of suppliers, we have about 13,000 suppliers. Nearly 3,000 of them are outside the United States, 10,000 are in the US. And the pandemic itself, as we all know, whatever part of the world or industry you're engaged in, severely disrupted our supply chains. We have worked very hard to make sure we sustain those supply chains. We've regionalised, we've nearshored some of our suppliers, we've duplicated supply chains in some areas, and some people have said to us, to our leadership, to me, that we should just simply take our suppliers back into western parts of Europe predominantly, and certainly the United States. But the reality of the world, and India is a very good example, that you cannot effectively sell, market and support your products without sourcing suppliers in markets throughout the world. And in India, we have 375 suppliers. They are very important to us in our partnership with India and the Indian people. We've also worked hard on creating inventory. We also put an enormous amount of effort into geopolitical risk analysis. And that's not something, I can say to you, it's not something that was done up until a few years ago, and built quite a sophisticated geopolitical risk matrix. We work very closely with our business units and functions, trying to analyse, to the extent we can, anticipate risk and try to get in front of it and make sure our supply chains remain secure. So it's extremely complicated, but we're working through it. And I'd also say that there are times when as human beings, we live through a period, and it's pretty easy to see the world's changed. It's never going to be the same. At the end of the Second World War, it was obvious. The world is not going to be the same. But in other periods, we go through over a generation, a period of transformation without a global cataclysm where the scale and the pace of the change is no less substantial. This is one such period.
It's, I was talking to a CEO of a very large and very old company who said to me recently that having a good view of what was happening in geopolitics might have given his company, large global company, an advantage, might have given an advantage in the past. Today, if he doesn't have a very clear and very deep understanding of geopolitics, it is a massive disadvantage, that it's basically impossible to run a multilateral company today.
It is, and I know that we've got a lot of people here at the dialogue who spend a lot of time trying to think about the future. And I say to our people, anyone that tells you they knows what's going to happen doesn't know what they're talking about. But to the extent that we can, we identify risks, and escalation of the conflict in the Middle East has been one of them, and look at what will our business and our supply chains look like if that were to happen. So this, what has happened and happening at the moment, is something for which we had prepared. And the other thing that we've done is we put our own people into our suppliers. You have to have collaboration, you have to build trust, you have to be transparent, and you've got to build your supply chain into your production lines. The days of just making your products, in our case planes, and having suppliers throughout the United States and other parts of the world and just contracting them, they are gone. We have to embed them in the very production process, so it's a true partnership, and with larger suppliers, we co-invest and we work together strategically. So we both own the problem, if you like.
So maybe, Stormy, could I come to you? And would you agree with the premise of my question to begin with, that we've reached the end of the age of globalization? Do you believe that is a fair statement? I guess I'm kind of looking for someone to push back on this to make it a debate, but tell me what you think.
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for this wonderful opportunity to discuss the issue and for having us here. And on your question with regard to, is this the end of globalization? I think it's the end of globalization as we know it and as we have known it over the last decades. And it depends a little bit on how you define globalization. If you define it in the sense of increasing economic ties, more trade, more openness, trade liberalization, more rules, multilateralism, more and more agreements, predictability, rules-based, all these aspects which made globalization the one we had known in the past, then I would agree that phase is probably most likely over. If we define it a little bit differently and say, well, this is a new phase of international economic interaction, which is characterized by more transactionalism, transactional deals, more bilateral or unilateral actions, then I would say we are still going to see a lot of economic activity and integration and interdependence in the world. It's just very different to what we like. What I would say, what I liked in the past. You started out your presentation by saying you are a child of globalization, of the old globalization. I would say I'm also a child of globalization, but I'm also a child of multilateralism and a rules-based system. I am a great fan of the WTO and free trade agreements, which have clear, predictable, transparent rules, which are as much as they can be, non-discriminatory, based on most favored nation treatment, national treatment, protecting smaller countries against bigger ones, also preventing that interactions are all power-based and more rule-based. And unfortunately, I think this is also not completely over, but severely different than in the past. And the question is how we are moving forward from this, right? Because we heard that earlier also on one of the panels, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I also heard several times before on the panels, the organizations and rules and institutions which we are having need reform, but it's better to have them instead of not having them at all. So how are we going to move forward? And I think that trade agreements like the one between the EU and India is a good way forward. Plurilateral agreements within the context of the WTO would be a great way forward, because what business needs is rules and predictability. I think we need to very much work on reforming the system to make it more adept, more agile, more flexible, but still creates a framework in which business can actually flourish. Because what we also know is trade has lifted billions of people out of poverty since the end of the Second World War. And we want trade, we want international investment, but for that you also need predictability, transparency, and rules. And how to protect or to get to this. This is, I think, the big question right now.
Thank you very much. Abla, I'd like to turn to you. From the perspective of Egypt, it's a different perspective from Europe or North America. How do you see the shifts that have happened for Egypt, but also for other countries of similar size and sort of position in the world? What are the changes in globalization and in supply chains what do they mean for countries like yours?
Thank you very much. Do you allow me to make some quick comments on what has been said? Okay, so far? Thank you. First of all, I like the title of this, Child of Globalization. I think you should have the names of all the countries that you pass by on your passport, not just your birthplace. All right. Now, about what's happening and did globalization disappear? The system is collapsing. I think the system is collapsing. We have the Bretton Woods system, which was created after the Second World War, with powers divided in a certain way, with population divided in a certain way. Right now, what we are trying to do, we have an elephant that we are trying to fit in a small box, and it's not fitting. And because it's not fitting, we are seeing everything that is happening, and we're not helping ourselves by even looking at the new system that is being made actually as we speak. We are not thinking about how to do it right. We are actually making it worse by doing wars, by inflicting lots of things that are making things so bad. This is my first point. My second point is related to the resilience efforts that's done by the business community. It's very costly. We are moving away from economics altogether right now in the system completely. In the past, it was the cost, minimize the cost by producing in the cheapest place possible. Right now, you want to reduce the risk as much as possible, which means an extra cost. Your risk is not risk of low quality anymore. It's the risk of having political problems. And we are killing the concept of efficiency, okay? And the problems that all of this is exacerbated by man-made actions. Resilience is also problematic, practically speaking, okay, at the sectoral level, because there are dynamics related. Can we keep the room a bit quiet, please? Because we really cannot hear each other. Huh? The baby is quiet. I applaud the baby. Thank you very much. Everybody else is, yes, seriously, applaud the baby. The resilience efforts, all the money that's being spent by Boeing, by the companies in order to try and accommodate all the risk that's taking place, okay, it is also tied and linked to the nature of the sector. There are dynamics to each sector. For instance, any oil company is forced to be located next to where the oil is. Okay, with this uncalled for war that's taking place in Iran, okay, the oil cannot go out to the rest of the world because it is stuck there. Okay, so I mean, so resilience has a limitation. I had to say all of these things before I answer your question explicitly. Now, about Egypt. Egypt has benefited in a way by the nearshoring because of its location. Egypt geographically located at the center of the world, literally, okay? And this made it very attractive as far as investments are concerned and as far as exports to the US in specific is concerned. We have also been lucky even with the craziness of Trump, okay? Because we have this QIZ agreement with the United States, which means we can export to the US at 0 tariff, okay? Became 10, now it's canceled, but it made Egypt attractive for having investments come over. So the nearshoring is benefiting some countries for sure, but when you talk friendly shoring, it's a problem because here your interest and your focus is on how friendly your neighbors are, okay? And this is odd because politics are there and it can change. So the dependencies that are being created, the new ones, are not necessarily ones that are going to last, okay? We're a very balanced country in our relations with everyone, and we managed to keep away from military bases in our country and to protect our economy as much as we can. Okay, I hope this answers at least the first round.
Thank you. Minister, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Poland obviously has been a huge beneficiary of globalization, of the fall of the Soviet Union and re-entering Europe and all the other things that have happened. From your perspective, where are we in globalization and what does that mean from your perspective?
Thank you very much. And it's great to be back in beautiful New Delhi. I was wondering if I should say that Poland is a child of globalization, and I decided not to go that way because we have a very good, long history of about 1,000 years of our statehood. But the last 35 years were arguably the best in at least last 500 years. We have benefited tremendously, as you said. Over the last 35 years, Poland was second fastest growing economy in the world, only second to China. We have joined EU, we have joined NATO, the strongest alliance that world has seen. We have benefited from what we thought for a while was the end of history. And I know that here in Resina, we've had this conversation that the end of history looked particularly ending in the West, but we were the beneficiary of that very, very much. Now, so where are we now? I agree that we are in the moment of fracturing. President Stubb is talking about a new world order emerging. I'm yet to believe that the new order is emerging. I think we are still in the moment of dissolution and negotiating this new order. I'm in a job that puts me mostly with my fellow trade and economy ministers. And I happened to join Polish government right before we faced the trade wars, new tariffs, and instability. So what I'm seeing very much is us in Poland, us in EU, trying to navigate this new disorder and make the best new order out of it. How we do it? One thing that we are doing is very much here with partners in India. We look to other like-minded powers, consequential powers. You can talk about them as middle powers, great powers, but we are certainly the consequential powers looking for rule-based system among those who want that. And here is where the end of globalization is not exactly the full correct picture, because there is a plenty of us in this room perhaps as well, but around the world that want to preserve the rules of the road, both when it comes to economics, trade, but also security. So we are reaching out to others like India, like Canada, like Australia actually, we are negotiating free trade agreements that will preserve that floor of rules. But and at the same time, there is something else that is happening, and I'm sure you are seeing this in Brussels, that EU and Poland that has been the most open and sort of we thrived in the world of openness. We also recognize that in a world where economic dependencies are weaponized, in the world that tariffs can be put on from day to day and predictability is lacking, we also need to, and here I'm missing a word because I don't like the word protection, but we need to get a little bit more spiky and a little bit tougher as we negotiate with partners that are not playing by those open rules. So I'm sure you are seeing this in Brussels, and I see this in my councils as well. When we are thinking of instruments that will give our industry, our consumers, an edge and level playing field when this level playing field is breaking. So that's where we are in this moment of negotiating this with this new reality. And we are definitely not there yet. We are doing this as we speak, literally.
Stormy, you wanted to respond? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would love to pick up on this. I think that some of our assumptions on which we based how we trade and how we structure our openness and so on might have been not so correct fully. And we are learning this, and we are learning this currently the hard way in the EU. And I think the first assumption is that trade liberalization would automatically lead to more economic growth, which it often does, but not always, would lead to more prosperity and would lead to more development. And that is not
democracy.
Well, that's the second assumption I'm going to come to in a second. But this development promise and this prosperity promise doesn't always come true, especially if the framework conditions aren't there for it, the domestic ones. And it has created, in some countries, pretty high income disparities and also between countries. And people are disappointed with this, and it feeds into also polarization, populism, the move to the right. I mean, a lot of the issues we are seeing currently in a lot of countries. And grievances, people are just unhappy about the economic situation. They can't or they expect not to have the same good life as their parents or a better life. Then the second assumption, that trade would lead also automatically to peace, stability, cooperation, and that is also not always the case if your interests and values diverge, and if you do have dependencies or interdependencies which are very different, then those dependencies can be used as coercive tools for political reasons. And we are seeing this repeatedly. And as European Union, we see that we do have dependencies in a lot of areas. Dependencies on export markets, but also dependencies with regard to imports, raw materials, but also certain technologies. And those are vulnerabilities, and that can be exploited. And for us now, the question is how to deal with this, right? So if we meet economic coercion from abroad, you need to also react to this, because that is unfair. It hurts your people. But if you are so open and dependent on international markets, whatever you do, put on tariffs or counter with other economic instruments, you're also going to hurt yourself. So the EU is currently trying to navigate that field and trying out how far it can go. But it is limited because of our dependencies, not just economic dependencies, also defense and military dependencies, obviously. So that doesn't make it so easy for the EU to maneuver this field. But I would say over the last, maybe 10 to to 11 months that there was a learning effect. So our reaction last year to the US tariffs were a different one last summer than now the reaction to the Greenland crisis, so to say. So the EU has reacted a lot more assertive, I would say, and also more unified, while at the same time pushing forward with new trade agreements with partners who want to work on certain issues in a rules-based matter. And there are still a lot of partners out there who want to do that.
Matthias, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I think so. It's always easy to say a lot of like critical things about Brussels and the EU, but when you look at what happened in the last couple of months, there are a few things I really liked. So I liked the way Ursula von der Leyen dealt with the first coercion coming from the United States. So she went to a hotel in Scotland and played nicely, but I think negotiated a really good deal, and a deal I hope that will also stay in the relationship with the United States. I also like that she pushed very hard, paid a political price for it, but pushed very hard for the EU-Mercosur deal. And the one that is probably the most defining deal is the trade deal with India, which was a huge success of both the member states and the commissions. But it was also a huge success because India was willing to make that deal and kind of, I think, played very nicely, a US president would say. It is a balanced deal, but it's also a sign that India really wants these economic ties with the European Union and a huge opportunity. So that's one part of economic deterrence. So when other people close the door, try to find new ones. But there is also another one. So in the age of mutually assured disruption, deterrence also means that the Europeans need to be ready to push back when other people close access, for example, to rare earth minerals. So that part of economic deterrence means on the one hand side, and by the way, it's the same conversation for India. Yeah? It means on the one hand side that economies need to understand where are they systemically relevant, where do they have the key means to disrupt other economies, and they need to be willing to use them in order to not to use them. That's kind of the Cold War logic of nuclear deterrence, and we need that in the economic space. And the reason why we need that is we can't just replicate all supply chains that we had before, because consumers don't want to pay for it through higher prices, taxpayers don't want to pay for it through higher taxes, and retirees don't want to pay for it through higher pensions or lower pensions as a result of companies losing their stock market valuation. We will not be able to completely decouple all economies, which again means that, and there I feel both Brazil and India are leading economies. The strategy needs to be to build as much partnerships as possible, to ensure we have as much interdependence as possible, but we should no longer be naive. The old world where rules will guarantee that those interdependencies can't be weaponized are over, which is why looking for strategies of deterrence is the name of the game.
Thank you. Did you want to? No. Okay.
Can I just
Yeah.
one word on this? Because for mutually assured disruption, which I like, for this to work, we need to make sure that it's mutually assured. And we right now, many of us, actually most of countries in this room, I bet, are on the less mutually assured part. So others can disrupt us more than we can disrupt them. And I think that's the way that's the direction that we and India is going. And one more little thing, which is, we are focused on trade and economics here, but of course we are talking about power. And I came to my role from security and defense background, and I was struck how absolutely useful it was in trade. Actually, it was much more useful framework, look at it through the framework of power than the framework of prosperity. And that's also something very new over the last months and years.
So I had lunch today with the CEO of a German family-owned health and pharmaceutical company, much smaller than yours, but still significant company. And it was very interesting speaking with the CEO. And her company supplies the military in Germany. So her company's doing quite well at the moment because of rearmament and because of the massively expanded defense spending in Germany. But it was fascinating to discuss with her about, I told her I was doing a panel on supply chains and that we would be discussing. So she gave me her perspective. She explained that during the pandemic, COVID-19, that the costs to her company went up tenfold overnight. So the costs of the medical supplies and things she was getting, particularly from China, went up tenfold overnight. And she explained that her laser focus today, as the CEO of this company, a growing company doing very well, is to reshore. Every part of the supply chain has to be in Europe for her now. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And I'm interested maybe to hear from you, Brendan, and also Abla. Do we think that the pandemic, the moment of the pandemic, this moment of COVID-19, that was the moment that everything shifted? People woke up and said, oh my God, we're so exposed. Look at what happened. The Chinese can shut off everything. Or do you believe that this trend of decoupling supply chains was happening already and perhaps inevitable? That's the question I have. And everyone can answer it, but I'm going to start with the two of you.
Thanks, Jamil. Well, certainly the pandemic was, perhaps for a lot of businesses, certainly was a shock and a wake-up call. But for a lot of others, concern about supply chains and the security of them had started before that. And you'll recall a debate which was in Europe, amongst other places, about so-called decoupling from China, for example. That's, by the way, not something that Boeing has contemplated. So I think in part those businesses that are truly global had been thinking about it beforehand. I also just come back to something in terms of prosperity and trade and global trade. John Norberg, the Swedish historian, published a book last year called Peak Human, and studied prosperity through civilizations and ages. And the most prosperous period for humankind has been since 1980. And the most prosperous countries and societies are those that are open to trade, to strangers, and ideas that question and challenge orthodoxy. So obviously there are a lot of reasons. For those of us at the dinner last night, we saw some stunning data in India about lifting Indians in extreme poverty out of poverty, reflecting what's happened in the world, but exponentially even greater in India, and for women in particular. And it isn't just the leadership of India and massive transformations in digitising financial payments, a modern financial system, energy transition, ICT, people, all of that sort of stuff. It's also because India, for example, has opened to the world in terms of trading. Our company is a truly global company. Yes, we're a proudly American parent company, and we always will be. But 80% of our market, commercial market, is outside the United States. 30% of our defence business is outside the United States. We've got 80% of our supply chain in the US, 85% of our workforce. But again, India is a very good example of in order for us to support and provide aircraft and defence platforms to the Indian government, to the private sector and air carriers in India, we will, and will continue to grow our supply chain in India and our presence in all sorts of things in advanced manufacturing and MROs and all sorts of other things. Planes, and there are other businesses that could say the same thing. Planes do not fly within borders. They fly across borders, across oceans. We need a consistent regulatory environment. We need consistency in emissions control and standards. And so one of the things you may have noticed is that the trade agreements that have been done with India, the United Kingdom, with the European Union, with Japan, with Southeast Asian nations, those trade agreements are all tariff-free on aerospace. The last thing that this industry, which is 4% of global GDP and employs 87 million people, the last thing that it needs is tariffs on aerospace, which will be a major impediment to one of the industries that has driven globalization. So, and on supply chains, a lot of governments have co-invested in major suppliers with forgings, non-recurrent engineering expenses. A lot of governments have done that and supported the development and accreditation and standardization of suppliers in their countries that are suppliers to us and to our competitors. The last thing that we're going to do is to abandon them. In fact, quite the opposite. And by the way, on the prosperity thing, it's like the European Union. People pocket the benefits of passport-free, visa-free travel, common currency, all of the common standards of the European Union, and then they focus on the negatives and complain about them. Trade, in a way, has been a bit the same, and as you say, grievance.
Yes, thank you. Going back to your question and then planting in comments here and there. All right, did it start with COVID? No, actually, it started, the changes in supply chain started from the financial crisis, as back as 87. What COVID did, okay, is make it very clear that there are risks associated with producing very far from where you need your products, okay? But then COVID brought other things as well, not only the disruption of the typical supply chain, but also it brought about a lot of mistrust between countries and between the people. I mean, and I'm thinking of Africa, all right? The whole difference between the Western world and the global South, okay, started to emerge very clearly with the COVID, okay? Even though everybody knew that everyone is affected by COVID and by the climate changes, etc., 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 the treatment on the ground did not observe that and did not respect that, okay, and showed a lot of unfairness. And that's the reason why BRICS, okay, and others started to emerge. It's a way out of a system that doesn't seem to be fair because it's not respecting the fact that the majority of the population are living in the global South, and even the wealth is also in the global South. So I think this is important. And this mistrust started a lot of things as well. From mistrust, I go to exploitation of Africa, and we're part of the continent. Africa is very rich in minerals. Everybody wants those minerals, okay? Everybody wants those minerals, and they want to leave Africa as poor as it has always been, always exploited, okay? Actually, one African colleague in a conference said the statement that I never forgot. He said that we are living in a world where there is a feast, everyone has a chair, and Africa is the menu, okay? And when you think about it, it is actually very true. There is a lot of exploitation that's taking place. So it's important if we are to correct the system, and this is what I want to get at. There is a system that's dying. There is one that is emerging. We are not letting it emerge right. As a matter of fact, there is something that's in the making that will grow up to be an animal that we cannot treat, okay, and we don't like, because we are not looking at proper solutions. We are not looking at the real problems. We are looking at the noise at the top of the iceberg. We're not looking at the currents. And what we are trying to do is completely wrong. We want to continue exploiting Africa by having the extraction instead of having supply chains, productions in Africa itself, so it becomes a win-win type of partnership, okay? That's number one. Number two, we are also not trying to correct the present system. We are living the illusion of self-correction. The World Bank is adjusting itself to become better for the poorer countries. This is impossible because the decision makers of the World Bank, okay, are the very same ones. So how can you step back from your privileged position and go back in order to benefit the others, okay? Finally, agreements like the one between the EU and India, bilateral agreements in general in order to solve the problem. I'm triggering a lot of responses. In order to solve the problems that are happening, this is not an antidote. This is not a full solution. Okay, it's very contained. It's relying on the smallest common denominator possible. They're not talking about any of the tricky issues. It will help a bit, but there is always the catch with bilateral agreements in getting caught into what we call in economics trade creation and trade diversion. Okay, by closing yourself in this small arrangement, you are depriving yourself from benefiting from the lower costs outside the agreement. And I can say more about that if you want.
Thank you very much. To your point about resource extraction, it's very interesting for me that it's often faster and cheaper to fly from an African capital into Europe and then back to another African capital. And if you look at a lot of the infrastructure that's been built over the last couple of decades, most of it by China or Chinese investment, it's very interesting because the roads, the railways, the ports, they connect from mines to the coast, and almost none of them are connecting countries across Africa. Almost all of them are pure, extractive, very clear, from the minerals and the mines, direct to the coast, put it on boats, send it away. And the infrastructure connecting up Africa is minimal still.
That's the exploitative scenario that needs to end, and hopefully if the EU invest in Africa with their values, they would do things differently. But then the US is not doing that, and the EU is not there in Africa, not visible.
Well, it's there, but not visible. That's, I think, the point. Matthias, and then Stormy. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good bridge to what I would like to say. And first of all, the way I look at Africa is it's the continent of the baby boomers of today. It is huge from an opportunity perspective. We heard in the opening session yesterday that one of these African hubs, in this case in Addis, for air transportation, made it possible for people to come here. So there are a few success stories, and we as a company took a decision in this situation to actually look at Africa as a place where we manufacture, including in Egypt, and we have prioritized Africa. I think had globalization continued as it was before, we might have supplied the demands in Africa from outside. And the example that I find most striking is the food space. Sub-Saharan Africa today imports food at a very, very high price. They spend more for importing food, and I don't even add the import cost for fertilizers to it. They spend more for importing food than for servicing the sovereign debt. So the debt crisis is like smaller actually than the food crisis. And investing in a different food system in Africa is something we believe will present a huge business opportunity for us. And if something good comes out of this situation is that I think the way we look at places outside of the traditional globalization hubs, like China, for example, the way we look at Vietnam, the way we look at Bangladesh, the way we look at India, the way we look at Egypt when it comes to pharma investment, or Zambia when it comes to food investment, is a very different one. Going back to the point that it's not enough to just deter, we also need to nurture openness as much as possible. And that is something we as businesses have no alternative to, because if the world really ends up in a Cold War-like complete economic split, it will come at a huge cost for us. So we have a very core interest in avoiding that. And one way to avoid this is to invest in places that wouldn't have been #1 topic in boardrooms even 3 years ago.
Stormy, you wanted to, yeah.
So many points to pick up on. What I wanted to say with regard to trade and prosperity, it does work if countries are playing by the rule, right? So as soon as you've got countries which are heavily subsidizing their exports, which are building up overcapacities, which are restricting exports using tariffs or quota systems, then it doesn't start to work anymore. And I think we have a little bit of an agreement on this panel. Then we need to also have instruments to counter this. And the old trade instrument toolbox, so to say, with the anti-dumping measures, the countervailing measures, that doesn't seem to be sufficient anymore. And that's why the EU has also put the anti-coercion instrument onto the table. The other thing which I wanted to pick up on is in an optimal world, trade, liberalization, and governing and rules would be all multilateral. We know that that doesn't work anymore, and it has not worked over, unfortunately, quite a while, as the WTO or the members of the WTO were not able to agree on new trade rules, which speak to the new area of how we trade, but also since the dispute settlement procedure is in severe trouble in the WTO. So since that doesn't seem to be an option right now, I think we need to go via plurilateral and bilateral trade agreements, even if they do have trade diverting effects, because it's the only other option we have to playing in a rules-less system. I'm afraid that is going to be a pretty long temporary solution. What I would actually wanted also to say is the next WTO ministerial is coming up later this month, and there are quite a few plurilateral agreements within that organization which are currently negotiated on trade facilitation. Investment facilitation, for example, but also on digital trade. And there are lots of countries who would like this. But because the organization is built on consensus, and there are a few who are not so happy about those plurilaterals, the negotiations are stuck. This is maybe also a call to some countries to overcome their opposition to those plurilaterals, to let those who want to move forward let them move forward on this. And the last thing I wanted to pick up on is when did we get the first glimpses of a changing globalization? And I do very much agree there was the financial and economic crisis of 2008. I think the first time we understood or started to understand how vulnerable you can be with regard to supply chains was the rare earth case in 2010, 2011, when China restricted the export of rare earth to Japan, but other countries were also severely affected by this. The EU was, the United States, then there was also a complaint of those three countries at the WTO. They won the case. And they also, and I remember this, in Germany, we started to talk about resource partnerships. We started to talk about buyers consortiums to buy, or to facilitate buying rare earth, investment in mining, and so on.
And then we forgot about it.
And then we fell back, yes, because when China noticed what was going on, it opened the valve, so to say, and prices dropped, and then there was no market case anymore to invest. Then we lost quite a few years, and the next time we really started to talk about this again in Germany, I would say, was after President Trump, after Trump won the first elections, the first Trump administration, and that was the first time we also started to talk about the anti-coercion instrument in Germany. We also, 2015-16, started to discuss dependencies on China. But the next, as you mentioned, the next turning point was COVID. The real wake-up call, however, I would say, was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Because for us, then it became so clear what it means to be highly dependent on one country with regard to your energy supplies. And it also changed very much our understanding and perspective of trade and stability and trade and peace. We called it Wandel durch Handel. That doesn't seem to work in all cases, and it also doesn't seem to
change through trade.
Change through trade, and it also doesn't work if
totally
you
discredited now.
A very different rationale. So I think for Germany and in parts the European Union, the latter was the biggest turning point.
Thank you. I'm going to allow the audience, if you feel like it, if you're not in a food coma, there's somebody already, to ask a question. Please tell us who you are, just name and affiliation, and please do ask a question, not make a grand statement, but you can go to either of the microphones. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, panel. My name is Catherine. I'm an ORF Young Fellow alum. My question goes to dynamics around private sector and government engagement. Most, if not all, advanced economies are now revisiting reindustrialization, investing in economic security measures. There are obvious gains for the private sector, particularly in critical tech, critical minerals, defense industry, but likely also increasing asks in terms of investing in our own resilience, if not taking loss-making measures around duplication and outright bifurcation. What are your reflections on an optimum model for engagement between government and private sector? And also, what does it mean for global companies for their identity and their operations in an era of increasing balkanization, if not bifurcation? Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. Globalization was a period where companies or businesses picked countries. So companies decided who would be the winners by way of investing in emerging consumer markets. We now live in a world where governments pick winners, and that is something even the tech oligarchs in the United States are now experiencing. In China, with a lot of red telephones, state-owned companies go like, what do you mean? Was it ever different? But I think for government engagement, that's a crucial shift. And it's one not well understood in many boardrooms. I also think that the shift leads to that companies that are systemically relevant need to much differently engage with governments than before. When you look at the most systemically relevant company in Europe, I would say it's ASML and Zeiss and Trumpf as two major suppliers. They had experienced that suddenly governments pick winners when the Biden administration called them to Washington and said, you are no longer allowed to export your last generation of lithography technology into China. But this is now happening at a very large scale. So systemically relevant companies need to be much better prepared for this world. So in our case, we are super relevant in the food system, and we are one of the pharmaceutical manufacturers that still produces pharmaceuticals from scratch. So the API dependency, which is a big problem in the pharma industry, for example, also in India, for many of the generic manufacturers, is something we are well aware of, and the kind of calls we get, similar to the ones we got during the pandemic, require a very different way of engaging with governments. That goes well sometimes, but it can also go terribly wrong, which is why this general geopolitical understanding of our business leaders is one of the critical success components going forward for us.
Thank you. We have a gentleman at the back there. Tell us your name and affiliation and question.
Hi, good evening. Binay Gupta. I am the CEO of Geosynthesis. We are a geopolitical, geoeconomic advisory firm. My question is for Matthias. You spoke about mutual assured deterrence, right? Could you kindly give a couple of use cases, real world applications in terms of how this can play out in the context of leverage? And a quick follow-up in terms of the panel. I would have loved the panel to explore the structural elephant in the room, which is China's unbalanced growth model. China needs to pivot from an export-oriented model to a consumption model for the rest of the world to adjust itself. That has not been addressed. All we are hearing about and pondering about are tactical responses to how we deal with China shock 2.0, whatever. Any thoughts? Thank you.
Yeah, I can give you, I think, the most striking example for a very strategic approach to avoiding choke points or avoiding being disrupted. It's in the area, again, of tech. If you think about the high quality, high-end silicon wafer technology, in the 2010s, more than 80% of these silicon wafers have been produced by a company bordering Germany and Austria, Wacker Chemie, so a chemistry company. And 10 years later, Wacker was number 8 of the suppliers in the space, and the top 7 suppliers were Chinese. Why did that happen? It happened because when you look at China 2025, when you look at the way also Beijing looks at this world, this area was seen as a weakness, but a weakness you can overcome through deliberate investing in the sector. So it is a deterrence mechanism in a sense that you do no longer are dependent on that supplier. And I think that's a model for thinking about areas where it's fairly easy to remove choke points. For those where it's hard, you just need to have another choke point that is so scary for your opponent in a trade war that he or she doesn't want to engage in that. That's the more nuclear option, or that's really the deterrence strategy in a world of mutually assured disruption. And most of the great examples I know are examples where China successfully executed that. And to the rare earth topic, fool me once, okay, fool me twice. I don't think that the next time I find an alternative supplier for a critical rare earth mineral, I then take the cheaper offer from China. That ship has sailed for Bayer.
A gentleman right here.
Hi, good evening. Václav Lukovic. I am from the healthcare industry, but actually I have a question mainly to Brandon. We've been hearing about big industry and big tech responding to policies and to changes. Now, Boeing is one of the key players in the US, right? And very critical industry. So what is actually big industry doing to influence those policies? Because in the whole panel, we've been hearing how you're reacting to the geopolitical changes, but you do have some influence and power. And I mean, many of the disruptions you mentioned are US made. So what are you actually guys doing to influence it?
He's in charge of international, but...
Thanks very much. Going back to the question in part from the young fellow, it was a very articulate question. Economic policy is now deeply embedded in security policy. And all of us, particularly in industry, we have to accept and respect that. And we have to make compromises about things that in a pure world that we might otherwise want to do. In terms of influencing governments, and I deal with governments all throughout the world, and I'm one of the members of the executive of the company. We're dealing, obviously, work very closely with the US administration, whatever that administration is. And with very few exceptions, we find that if we have a persuasive argument that's credible, that's factual, that's not emotional, that's not politicized in any way, and we go to the administration, whether it's Democratic, whether it's Republican, the current administration, when we put that case, knowing the importance of our company to the United States of America, the number of Americans we employ, the money we put into 10,000 suppliers across the United States in 50 states, we know we are always listened to. We don't always get what we'd ideally want, but, and again, you know, it's reflected in these trade deals, for example, that we've explained to the administration that it is only because of the 1979 agreement on large civilian aircraft, engines and avionics, that the Boeing company is a truly global company. And in order for us to sell our products and services into markets throughout the world, to employ Americans, to feed American families, mortgages and pensions, we need certain provisions in terms of policy settings in the US, principally but not only around trade. And on the digital, the technology-driven side of it, of course, it's critically important for us, especially in our defence business, how we influence that. They're classified programs, as you could imagine. How we influence that is with evidence. But in the end, if a government, whether it's the Indian government whether it's, I'm an Australian, whether it's the Australian government, whether it's the American government, if in the end they make a decision, whether we disagree with it or not, we accept it, we respect it, and we get on with complying with it. So, and sometimes governments actually make mistakes and realise they've made them, and they'll backtrack from some of the things that they've also done. So.
You would disagree with that, wouldn't you, Minister? Never made a mistake.
Exactly. No, never. So the point that I don't know if this is what you want me to address, but there is among the questions we've had, yes, governments definitely make mistakes. Some even admit to that. Others might wait for courts to, for example, intervene, and we find a way forward. But I think one piece that I wanted to comment on, and we are dancing around it, and we have only like a minute and a half left. But a gentleman asked this question about China. We are actually talking so much here about China without naming the issue outright. And the question, the way I understood you, is whether we are just tactical in this. And I can tell you that in Europe, we are deeply strategic about how we see this challenge, because it's existential. It's existential to our prosperity and therefore also to our security. What we are in the midst of is coming up at a set of tools that can deal with this very deep challenge of overcapacity, overproduction, currency that is overvalued. The question that I have when I talk with my colleague ministers and with my think tanker colleagues, whether the tools that we are coming up, are we fast enough and are they effective enough to deal with the challenge that is really a single but a very large challenge to deal with? Thanks.
We're out of time, but Stormy, you'd like to have the very last word, so I'll...
If we are, well, I don't have to.
No, please. Perfect.
I also wanted to comment on the China issue from the European point of view, and we also have to, admit that there is not yet a very concise EU approach to China, because there are different interests. We are working on it, I would say. But because countries have different dependencies on China as export market and import dependencies, there are differences. And we see that in our application of trade defense instruments. But what you also see with regard to the EU is a much closer look at our own common market. Because the strength, and that is also something which is holds true for other countries and regions in the world, strengthening your own regional ties also makes a lot of sense. So picking up on what you said earlier with regard to South-South trade, South-South trade is actually pretty weak instead of North-South trade or North-North trade. And there are a lot of barriers, regulatory barriers, tariff barriers, and working on this and closer regional integration is a great way to realize welfare gains. So this is, I think, something we take. We are currently looking intensely at how to strengthen the common market, but it makes a lot of sense for other regions in the world as well.
Thank you very much. Time is up, unfortunately. So if you have other questions, please feel free to accost the panelists as they're leaving the event. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, for joining us this evening. Thank you to my amazing panelists. Brilliantly done. Thank you. See you tomorrow and next year. Thank you.